He agrees with. Oh.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of this series on the stained glass window stories of the pandemic. I'm Taha Kehar, and I'm the co editor of this compilation. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce my guest today. On my right, I have Tamreez Inam, who is a literary critic and a writer. She works for the Emirates Literature Festival in Dubai as head of education initiatives. Her first short story was longlisted for the Zinat Harun Rashid Writing Prize in 2019, and this is her first traditionally published story. Am I right? Or
Yes. Assalamu alaikum and Happy New Year. Thank you for having
Happy
me.
New Year, indeed. And on my left, I have Avais Khan, who is a graduate of the University of Western Ontario and Durham University. He has studied creative writing at the prestigious Faber Academy in London. He is authored in The Company of Strangers, which was published by Simon and Schuster in South Asia and the Book Guild in the UK. He is the founding director of the Writing Institute in Lahore, and I believe you have two other books coming out.
Wes, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Aves. Your voice is just okay. We'll let you sort that out. I'm just going to
How
introduce.
ironic that we just did a test and it was working
It was
perfectly.
perfectly fine.
मैंने नजर लगा दी Wes because I said, oh, कितनी अच्छी video quality.
Nevertheless, why don't you disconnect and reconnect? Maybe that might work for you. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about the topic that we have at hand. It's called Fiction, Reality, and the Pandemic. Most of the stories that we received drew upon reality, but there was a fictional element to them. And if you read them, you would see these are mirrors to reality. And I still believe that all these stories are reflections of reality, but some are more real than others. And the stories that Tamriz and Aves produced for this anthology were very realistic. So I'm just going to get into hi Aves, you're back.
So there's a message that is saying if you use your remove your earplug, see if that helps.
Perhaps that might help.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Oh,
perfect.
great.
Perfect. Okay.
As a result.
Thank you
Yes.
guys.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you guys what inspired you to write these stories. Anyone would like to go first? What was your inspiration? How did you find the motivation to write at a time when the world was under a crippling lockdown?
Ladies first.
All right.
Sure. So for my story, when I was thinking of what to write about, a couple of things sort of happened that gave me the idea for the story. So I had worked from home for about 3 months and we'd had a lockdown in Dubai. And then I'd gone back to work sort of mid June. And one day I was driving back from work and I was listening to the radio. And the radio show host was so upbeat and positive. And I was thinking, दुनिया में कुछ भी हो रहा होता है, these guys have to really put on this brave public persona and it just sounds so hyper and upbeat. So I wonder what it's like when they're dealing with something in their personal lives, and they still have to come on the show and then just be so positive. And I'd read an article which had talked about that domestic violence was on the rise during lockdown, and a lot of couples were facing increased domestic violence. So there was that. And then I actually walked into a door myself. It
Mhm.
was I was at home. It was dark. I thought the door was open, and I walked straight into like the edge of the door, and I got this really bad purple eye for about a week or 2 weeks, and I would cover it up with makeup, and I actually postponed a few online things that I had to do because I was so embarrassed. And my friends would crack jokes about, is Asim beating you up? That's my husband. And the fact that I could
Oh
laugh
my.
about that really got me thinking about what it would be like for a woman who actually was, who was facing this in her personal life and how that would impact her confidence, how she would come into work, just so that started like, so these three different things started playing in my mind. And then I wrote about this radio show host who's so popular and she's so lively when she's on her radio show, and in her personal life, this is the kind of thing she's dealing with.
So Tabrize's story, the show must not go on, is essentially about whatever she mentioned right now. It's about domestic abuse, and it's about how there's a public persona and a private persona, and how women negotiate that, oftentimes at a cost to their own personal well-being. So, Aves, what do you have to say? What was your inspiration for the story?
So my inspiration was a little closer to home, like Tamri said, that during the pandemic, we've all had to sort of, everything has been redefined for us. So I had this really nice institute going on in Lahore, and due to the pandemic, I had to literally shut it down because obviously health comes first. So I had to lay off all my staff and really close all the doors. And for a couple of months, I was totally out at sea. I didn't really know where I was going with my life because everything I'd worked for had just sort of closed down. So then this idea came in to start an online thing and everything. But that also got me thinking that what must it be like for married couples who have responsibilities and who have children? And if a man or a woman in a marriage were to lose their jobs, how would that reflect on the family? So I thought that although I'm not married, so I don't know if what I've written is believable or not, but I just felt that it would be good to show how, from a male perspective, because generally in Pakistan, men pride themselves at the fact that they're earning and they're doing this job. So how would they feel about being stuck at home, and how would that affect the relationship, and how stable are men really? As much as they pretend to be, they're not actually that stable emotionally. So that's what I wanted to show.
That's fascinating. I'll get back to this, but something you mentioned about couples being at home got me
Yeah.
thinking about the fact that both your stories deal with spousal relationships. Both of them talk about how the pandemic has affected marital just marital relationship. In Tamriza's story, you have marital discord. In your story of S, we have a kind of discord that doesn't really verge on negative, but it's just something that's in the mind. So, would you like to tell me a little bit about the relationship between your spouse, the spouses in your stories, and why you chose to focus on the private sphere?
Me. So yeah,
Anyone?
okay. So Tamriz can go first.
We'll do a little. Yeah.
Well, so we'll stick to this order. Um,
Yeah.
my favorite genre to read is family drama, or even to watch. I mean, I'm just fascinated by interpersonal relationships. So I'm always very sort of interested in the inner lives of characters and the relationships between family members. So if that's why I focused on the personal spheres. That's just what I'm always interested in.
Wes, what would you have to
So
say?
yeah.
Why did you
So
focus
I
on?
I
I mean,
think
you
I
tell. Yeah.
I'd echo Tamriz here because I like she said that when the pandemic came in, we sort of heard a lot about domestic abuse rising. So I just wanted to explore that. Why would it rise? What exactly would be the reason behind it? And I wanted to explore those dynamics. That what would drive people to start disliking each other when they're stuck in a closed space for an extended amount of time. So that's where my story came from, and I really wanted to sort of Yeah, I've never written from a person in his 50s, a man in his 50s. So that was like my first attempt. So I just thought that it would be interesting to venture out of my comfort zone and write about someone who's like in his 50s. Yeah.
That's lovely. So both of your stories also depict social issues and problems that arise in social situations. The Marisa's story deals with domestic violence, which is an issue that is often brushed under the carpet and was somewhat given the importance that it deserves during the lockdown period. And Aves, your story deals with economic realities, how people got laid off during the pandemic. And I just wanted to know how or to what extent do you feel all these realities should be reflected in fiction? Or to what extent should fiction focus on these realities? And I'm talking specifically about COVID-19 stories because we've received quite a few submissions. And as I said, this book is not a complete depiction of experiences, but there are so many people who lived in their own little cocoon, and there were so many people who embraced reality and lived them. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts on this whole that dichotomy between fiction and reality was. Anyone of
For me,
you
I mean,
would like
fiction and reality, it's the same thing. I mean,
to?
really good fiction is life, you know, and even actually really good fantasy, which is probably, you know, you think it's as far away from reality as possible. It's really good fantasy when it brings in reality. So even if you create like an imaginary world, what would really bring it to life for people is when, you know, the dynamics, the relationship, the characters seem believable, you know. So I don't know, I don't see a dichotomy. I read a lot of nonfiction, and really good nonfiction is actually written like a novel sometimes, you know. So if you think of Sanam Maher's book about Kandil Baloch, it read like a novel, and that's what made it into
Exactly.
such a good nonfiction book. And when you read really good fiction, it feels real, you know, and it all comes from life. So that's what I think.
I actually
Avest?
totally agree with Tamriz here as well, that really good fiction should be a reflection of, it should be believable. So your characters, they should be basically something, they should look like they're believable. And that's what I tell all my students as well. I also felt that during the pandemic, we were so focused on what was wrong with our own lives, like, for example, losing a job or going through a terrible time, that we sort of felt sorry for ourselves the most. But I think it's very important to bring out stories where you see that you may not have it the worst. The people out there are probably going through something much worse. People are for example, I read about this one family that lost 15 members to the pandemic, so to coronavirus. So that really got me thinking that losing a job isn't anything at all. But then again, losing a job might mean everything for some people. I thought it was very interesting to showcase economic realities as well. That again, for that particular person, their world might be imploding just because of losing a job. So it's just a matter of perspective. So that's what got me into this. Uh, yeah.
So I'm going to dive into your stories now, and I'm going to have a spoiler-free conversation because I would love everyone to immerse themselves in your stories because they're beautiful stories. I just wanted to know what you thought of your protagonists. Your Aves, yours was a man. Imri's, yours was a woman. And when you were conceiving them, did you have anything in particular in mind that you wanted to explore, or anything that you want to say about your protagonist, just as a way of introducing them to people who don't know much about them? 3 words, a couple of sentences, anything.
Okay,
I
if
believe
I'm
we're
going
following the same
first, am
order.
I going first again, or Wes? You
Yeah,
go first now.
Yeah.
okay. So my main character is a man in his late 40s, early 50s, and he's a very high-powered senior executive, and he's just all of a sudden lost his job because he's been laid off, and he just can't get over the fact that someone in his position, someone who's been so successful all his life, is suddenly out of job, and he just the story is about him coming to terms with it or not coming to terms with it. So yeah, so that's what my
Yeah.
protagonist is.
Yeah.
I read Aves's story, and like what he says about like this guy who just can't believe he's been fired. I actually laughed at some of the things he says, where he's just like so full of himself, and he can't believe like how dare they do this to me, you know. So
Exactly.
it's a really interesting character, and I have a feeling you sort of, when you said you went out of your comfort zone to write this character, you really took on a character that you would probably not even like so much yourself, but
Oh
having some sort
no.
of empathy for understanding what he's going through. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was really
Right.
interesting. For
Thank you.
my
Thank you so
um,
much.
for my protagonist, her name's Rabia. She is one of the most popular RJs in Pakistan. She's in her like late 20s, early 30s. She's been married for a couple of years, married her sort of university sweetheart, if we have that term in Pakistan. And one of the main, maybe this is your next question, I don't want to like preempt this, but she married someone who came from a different social standing. So that's also like an element in the story that I wanted to explore.
Uh-huh. But you've really delved into the psyche of this character. Rabia is someone who not only goes through domestic abuse, but she also has there's so much depth in her, in the sense that she is capable of making mistakes. She is capable of being strong. There's so much that goes into that one character. So I just wanted to get into her relationship with her husband. How do you see it? Do you see it as extremely negative? Do you see it as somewhat? Um,
Yeah,
I
so for me,
I don't
thank
know.
you for saying that. I really appreciate you saying that you saw depth in the character. For me, she's really strong. She's a really strong person. And of course, she has this really, really incredible public persona. You know, she has tons of social media followers. She's super popular. She does this show where, she's really popular. She has been doing it for a number of years. So there's all of that. And in her relationship as well, I didn't want the guy to come. I know he comes across as really negative, but I also wanted, and I didn't have like, in a short story you don't have that much space to
Yeah.
really like, flesh out every character, but I also wanted us to sort of see his point of view a little bit, where he's also dealing with stuff, and actually like Aves's character, and I don't want to give too many spoilers, but
Yeah, don't
he's
give too much away.
yeah, he's dealing with his own stuff. So I think like when you have really black and white characters, it gets really boring. So
Mhm.
Rabia isn't a saint, and her husband isn't a saint either, and neither of them is a villain either. It's just, there are cracks in their relationship that during the lockdown just became fissures, and it's the relationship starts falling apart. And it's about like Aves was saying, like what are they going to do about it, and when things start getting really bad, like then Rabia is in this dilemma of what next, and it's literally just one day in her life that I trace. So
Mhm.
um, can't say too much.
Don't- You can if you want. I mean, I've had people tell the whole story during these
No,
sessions.
it's such a short
It's
story.
fine.
Mine is so short.
No spoilers.
So I'm going to get to Aves now. You've really explored the insecurities men have because your character, um, even though his wife was working, he envies her. Yes, he feels that he can't do anything at that point in time, but he does feel that sense of envy. Was it easy for you to talk about the insecurities of men?
Oh, well, I think as a writer, as an author, it's very important for
Mhm.
us to put some distance between us and our characters, and
Yeah.
that's what makes it easier to write these characters. So a character doesn't have to be a reflection of you as a person. So I mean, it goes without saying, obviously, that an author basically creates a character, but the character takes its own life later on.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I don't think that it was that hard for me to write this character. Obviously, it was a leap out of my comfort zone, but I really think that men in Pakistan do have these insecurities all the time, and so yeah, and being out of a job is one of them. So I do think that his wife would have reacted much better to this had she been the one who
We'll
had to
get
go
to
through.
that.
Because I feel that. Oh, sorry, did I preempt the question?
No, no, no.
Sorry,
It's. I'm glad you did.
but yeah,
I
I
do want to
sense
ask
that.
you that. What would his wife do if she'd been laid off?
Yeah, I think she would have taken it in a much better way, because I think women in general can multitask really well. I've seen it happen in my own family with my grandmother, my dadi as in. So she used to run a business and she used to sort of look after her family as well, and she did a fantastic job of it. Men generally in Pakistan can't even think of doing something like this. Imagine a man even doing that. So it's very impossible for them to imagine this, as sad as the reality is. But yeah, I feel that his wife would have reacted in a much stable manner. This guy simply lost it when he lost his
I
job.
simply lost
So
it.
yeah,
It's also how we define our self-worth, right? And in Pakistan, or
that
actually around the world, for men, self-worth is derived from their careers primarily, you know.
Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
And so losing that, you're kind of left with nothing. So
absolutely.
it can be very tough. And for women, that's not the case. Even for independent working women, we get a lot of sense of satisfaction and self-worth from our careers, but it's okay to take a break. Socially acceptable to take a break from your career. We take maternity breaks. I took a break when I got bored. I
We've
decided to
all
take
done
a
that.
year off for like just exploring my passions, and I could do that because my husband was working. I think it's less acceptable for men to say, I'm just going to take a year off and read at home, you know?
Yeah. I wish I could do that.
So, Tamreez, one thing I noticed about your story, and this is not in the list of questions I shared with you, but there's you draw parallels between two parent-child relationships. You have Rabia and her son, then you have Rabia's mother-in-law and Rabia's husband. How different are those relationships in your eyes? And
Oh,
do you
yeah,
think
I didn't think of the parallels between their relationships. Um, for I mean, I would say like they're both really like invested good mothers, but
Mhm.
for the mother-in-law, she's in a really tough spot because she's kind of conflicted in having to stand up for her daughter-in-law, but also she really empathizes with her son because she sees like he's going through a hard time as well. In Rabia's case, again, I don't know if this is going to be a spoiler, but her main concern for her son is that she doesn't want him to be caught up in this cycle of violence. Like when you have this troubled, broken home, you don't want the
Mhm.
children to be at the receiving end of all of that negativity. So I actually didn't think too much about what the two mother-son relationships looked like, but those were my two concerns, or what I was thinking of as I was writing those relationships.
And then the child also experiences the violence firsthand. And do you think, I mean, was there a particular reason why you weaved that? And obviously, without any spoilers, I'm just very
Yeah.
curious about this.
This was also in the article. I read a couple of articles actually. This was in an article I read that when you have abusive homes, there's a cycle of violence that takes place, and victims become abusers, abusers become victims, and that cycle of violence for me was really, it just really disturbed me actually. If you think about even like unrelated to my story, they say a lot of pedophiles have actually been abused themselves as children. And that for me is such a shocking, such a disturbing thing to come to terms with. Like people that I despise, like I would never like say that the death penalty is okay in any situation, but you bring to me a pedophile and I'll have a very like visceral negative response to that, and I might even say like, yeah, fine, I'm in favor of it. So these are people that we really despise, and then to find out that actually they've been abused as children themselves, it's a very hard thing to come to terms with. My story isn't as horrific as that situation, but there is the cycle of violence that I wanted to bring in with the child. So that was the reason I brought that in.
And and
So
just to
Vince,
echo Tamreez, sorry, I just wanted to say that she's absolutely right that children are a very major part of that. That they, whether you want it or not, the child does see that, and he does experience that violence, that cycle of violence. So I think that's a very good thing that you did, that you included the child, because like it or not, they are a part of the family, and they pick on a lot of things that we don't really think children would pick on. The children are very intelligent in that way.
Yeah, and it always
Wes is
happens like even if you don't take violence. Oh, sorry. Even
no,
if you
go
don't
ahead,
think
go
of
ahead.
like, even if you don't think of physical violence, even like verbal abuse, what happens is, when you have power dynamics, the person who is oppressing one person then takes it out on someone else, and this is like a power
Absolutely.
dynamic you see in all kinds of relationships. If a man, for instance, is being sort of abused or feels disrespected at work, they'll come home and take it out. Then the woman needs to take it out on someone else, and they'll take it out on their servants, for instance. Or so there's this like this negativity that just brews more negativity. So without making it all sound so horrible, but yeah,
Basically, the story is not as horrific.
yeah, it's
It's
not as
it's actually
gruesome.
it's no, it's actually a very well balanced story. Aves, you also have children in your story,
Oh yeah, I
and
do.
I
I was
was
so sure you're
curious
saying you
when
have
you.
I
children. He's
was,
like, no,
I
I
was
don't.
like, for
No,
a
no,
moment, I was
no.
like, what children is he
It took
talking
me some
about?
time to say in your story for some
Yeah,
reason. I apologize for that, but
In your story.
yeah.
in your story. So I was just wondering if you had told this story from that one of the children's perspectives, and they're watching their parents go through this Cold War, so to speak.
Yeah.
How different would it be? What would the child feel? What?
You know, I feel that the child wouldn't be that affected by it. If you notice the story, they're like, they do take it, they do watch their father and everything, but because their mother is such a stabilizing influence on them, that they don't really uh, worry about it. They're like, maybe it's a phase, it'll get better. I think that if it was told from a child's perspective, that's what they'd be thinking as well. That as long as their mother is there and she's a stabilizing influence on them, things can't be that bad. And it's not like the father is like beating them up or anything. He's like not directly in contact with them in that regard. He's not directly venting out his frustration on his children. So that way, the children wouldn't be that concerned, because I mean, we all know how attached a child is to their mother. Our
Mother.
our mothers are basically like our primary caregivers, no matter what, and we all turn to our mothers whenever we need something. So if their mother is still a stabilizing influence, I think they'll be fine. That's what I think would happen.
I'm glad. Tamiz, what
Yeah.
do you think? What if Rabia's story was told from her son's perspective? Would it be any
So
different? Yeah.
So I think children are really forgiving of their parents at that young age. So Rabia's son is 5 years old, and at that age, children just forgive everything. I remember this incident. This was I used to live in London a couple of years ago, and I remember I was standing in Boots, which is a pharmacy there, and this mum slapped her child in front of me. And in England, this is really rare. Pakistan mein to hum ek do laga dete hain, but in England, this was shocking for
Exactly.
me to see. This mum smacked her child. The child was crying, and then he went back to the mum and hugged her and said, "No, no, no." So it's like at that age, even if your mom smacks you, you go to her for comfort. And that's a really interesting sort of like dynamic that children have at that young age, right? And it's
Uh-huh.
really heartbreaking to see as well, because you're going to your not the parents are abusers, but you're going
Uh-huh.
to your abuser for comfort. It's a really strange thing. So I think children at that age, if I were to write from Rabia's son's perspective, they're just so forgiving and their parents are everything to them. It changes, of course, when they're teenagers and
What
then the
you can
parents
say, yeah.
can't do anything right, So I think Aves's character's children might write a very unforgiving story about their father.
Unforgiving story, indeed.
Yeah, I was thinking about the younger child, but it's interesting what you say that in teenage years the parents are the ones who are wrong. But I feel that in your 20s and 30s, I'm like 33 and I still get scolded by my mother, and I'm going back to I'm the one who always says sorry to her. So I think the cycle changes again. It's like the
Oh
coin flips
yeah,
again, and then
after
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I think
I
after mid
think
20s or 30s, then we find like we need our parents again. Like I
Exactly.
feel now I need my parents more than ever. But though that
indeed,
middle patch of being
Yeah,
a teenager and early 20s, you just want to be like out there
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
disconnect.
true.
so
Absolutely. Yeah.
unless your character, I don't know if I should call him a cynic, should I call him a defeatist? What did you have in mind when you conceived a character? Did you want him to be cynical? Did you want him to be someone who's just lazing about? And then I'm
Yeah,
going to get to the
I
mothers very soon. Yeah.
No, I think he definitely was a cynic because he was just because he lost his job, he thought that the world had ended. And there's a scene where he has the newly implanted hair and he's taking it out one by one just to make himself feel worse. So he's like he feeds into that cycle of sadness or whatever that he's feeling. So he really so yeah, he definitely is a cynic because if he wasn't a cynic, could have taken this as an opportunity to connect with his children, and because his wife was still working, it wasn't like they were starving or anything, so she was still bringing in money for the family, so he could have really taken out this time to take the load off of her and basically connect with his children, and you know just to see what it's like to be a family, because the kind of person he was, he didn't have any time for that at all. So yeah, so I felt that, and traditionally that's exactly what usually men feel, that they don't want to spend time, especially in that age. They love their high powered careers and everything. So yeah, so I thought that he was a bit of a cynic.
He's also
So
a
yeah.
bit of a man child because he calls his mother and
He is, yeah.
I want to get it.
That was so good.
He actually did not care at all that his parents might get COVID. He was just, all he wanted was to just go and visit his parents. So
So
it
I
was
just
really, yeah.
Oh, that scene
I
was
just
so
wanted to
good.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you
what
liked it.
it was quite an interesting scene. So what are his dynamics with his mother like?
Enough
Wow.
of him.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I think she probably had enough of him as well, because he was evidently in his, I mean, obviously early 50s, and he's still clinging to his parents, and it absolutely does not care about his parents at all. That they're probably in their 70s or 80s now. So it just goes on to show that I didn't want to use the F word, but I thought that it would really be impactful in this sense, because really was acting very weird. So I wanted his mother to put him right, as mothers generally do. So yeah.
So moving into the Raza's story, you've touched upon this a little bit about Rabia's mother-in-law. Do you think she's Rabia's ally? Is she, or
Yes.
is it just yeah?
Yeah, no, I really didn't want to write a typical Saas Bahu relationship. I'm just so sick of that narrative. In our
Exactly.
dramas and everything, bas hamesha saas ki sari galti hoti hai. And around me, I've seen like, including my own mother-in-law. I mean, there's so many amazing mothers-in-law. But yes, I did want to show that it's a very tough situation for her. They live together, and the mom-in-law, obviously, it's her son, so she has a soft spot for him, but also she can see like what's going on, and she really comforts Rabia. She stands up for her, and so yes, she would definitely be an ally for her.
So we have a lot of comments coming in, and could we have a few comments and questions on the screen? I think that would be a good conversation starter. Homa Sheikh says it's so good to get all the authors' views. Okay, that's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank
Homa's
you.
also a contributor. So Okay, this one is
So,
for Aves. Good to see Aves Khan. By the way, how many stories are there in the anthology? So there are a total of 26 writers, and there are about 20, I'd like to say 27, I keep forgetting. 27 pieces in the anthology. One is a poem by Mehwish Amin. And
which
yeah,
is so brilliant. So I haven't made my way through the whole
amazing.
anthology, but I started with the poem and I read a couple of them, and that's a brilliant poem.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Madiha Khan says, looking forward to reading Timreez's story. Okay, that's lovely. We both
Thank
have
you.
fans. So
You love it. You love the Misa story. I really liked it myself.
Thank you.
Muniba says, do you think fiction around the pandemic will become the norm, or this is a trend, is a timely trend?
I think, yeah, I think it's a timely trend. No, I don't think that this would become a norm. I don't think, not with the vaccine coming out. Hopefully, that we'll all be able to live our lives the way we did before. So, yeah, I don't think so. But never know.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
what do you think? Do you
Yeah,
think
I
this will
agree.
be like a World War II moment where we'll look back and we'll have stories being written about people trapped in homes
Could
and
be, could be,
I
but I
hope
think people are
not.
just,
I hope not.
I hope not. We're just so ready to move on, you know. But maybe
Exactly. Maybe
in
it's just too soon.
retrospect, yeah, maybe in retrospect, it'll be something that would be referenced, you know.
Hmm.
mm, true.
Something
Yeah,
like the
I
book
think the
Thief.
reference would be there.
Okay, so Mudassir Javed has said, what does he said? He said trends in literature do not last long. They keep on changing with the passage of time. Do you guys agree? Do you think? I mean,
Well,
you practically have said it,
I
but
don't know. I don't know. I don't think so actually because you see the thriller trend. It started with Gone Girl. I mean, obviously Rebecca started it, the Daphne du Maurier's
yeah,
Rebecca, but it really
yeah,
took off in 2010, 9 or 10 with Gone Girl, and it's still going strong. So it's been a decade,
still
more than
going
a decade
strong.
now, and that trend is still going strong. So I don't know. Maybe I just don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, it
What
also
about you?
depends what we mean. Yeah, I don't know what it means. If it's a trend, like again, like the example that Yves gave, like every book coming out at one point had the word "girl" in the title. That's kind of died down, thankfully. We had "Girl on the Train" and "Gone Girl" and
Girl on the window. There was
"All in
something.
White," and we had a lot of these girls. So those kinds of trends don't last. But some of those like classic elements of storytelling,
Yeah.
they're they'll always be there. So, for example, I read The Dutch House recently by Anne Patchett, and it kind of takes on like a very, very classic fable kind of element of storytelling, the stepmother and the children and their longing for their mother. These are very classic elements of tales, and that you can just play with again and again and again. So yeah, trends like little trends like the girl titles, those pass, and then classic elements of storytelling withstand the test of time.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to delve into one more question. So both your stories deal with the realities of relationships. There's that honeymoon phase, and then you move on, and you have to deal with these hard-hitting challenges, um, and they vary. There's a whole spectrum of issues that need to be dealt with. So Tamriz, your story actually captures how expectations change over time, or the realities don't measure up to those expectations. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts on that were in terms of your story.
Yeah, so one of the things I feel like, especially in Pakistan, which is a big issue when people are getting married, is around differences in class backgrounds. Like, so I wanted to explore that element of class and like social standing, which is so, so important, especially like to our parents' generation. But also to acknowledge that there is some truth to it. Like when your parents are concerned about, oh, tum guzara kar logi, and these kinds of statements that you hear. And when you're young, it's all about love. No, I'm in love with this guy. And for my protagonist, then the daily grind of having to live in this sort of lower middle class family with the greasy, grimy kitchen, and she's having to do the dishes, and there's never enough money. And her parents, when they come to visit her, they turn up their noses at like, you know, we have to drive down from our posh neighborhood to this location, whatever, those kinds of dynamics, they take a toll on a relationship. And you have to have a very, very strong relationship and a really good bond to actually say, like, you know what, I don't care about any of this stuff. But then in the story, the lockdown really, brought everything into stark relief. All of these issues, which probably had been lingering or had created cracks in their relationship, they really then came into sharp focus. So I don't know if I answered your question. What was your question?
You did. You did.
Okay.
You did. It's just a comment. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So yes, your couple has been married for longer, and things change. Life takes you in different directions. But do you think that your Asif and his wife were able to negotiate the challenges, the changes efficiently, well enough? Do you think that their relationship? I mean, I'm not going to ask you to give away a spoiler, but do you think that this marriage can survive the tests of the lockdown?
I'd like to think so, to be honest, because yeah, although Asif is definitely a man child and he's been a big baby since the pandemic happened, but I think that his wife is definitely more sensible and she is willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, there's only so much one can take. So yeah, so I don't know exactly. It's something that maybe I'll write a follow up on that. But yeah, I do think that it should be able to stand the test of time because they've been together for more than a decade, I think. So
Exactly.
so yeah, I'm sure she's had many such incidents in the past where he has acted like this, and she has decided to forgive him or sort of fix him or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I think so, but you can never be sure because pandemic has changed everything. So you can't be
Exactly.
sure. Yeah.
So, moving away from your stories, I just wanted to know a little bit about Tamriz. You do a lot of literary criticism on Instagram. Your account is Reading Pakistan, and you find these lovely book reviews there. And as you are an author, you also get to see a lot of literary criticism about your work. So now Tamriz is on the other side of things now. She is a writer, and you're still where you are. So I just wanted to know, um, how do you deal with criticism, and what do you think? What criticism do you anticipate when it comes to a story like the show must go on and must not go on and nowhere to go?
Yeah. You see, with criticism, the thing is that I feel that being a writer or being an author is a learning process. It always is. So you don't know I don't think everyone knows everything. So I always take my criticism with gratitude because that allows me to grow as a writer, and something that I may not have realized. Some of my readers do realize that, and I'm thankful to them for pointing me in that direction. But having said that, criticism. That's what I tell my students as well. Take criticism if it's constructive. If it's criticism for the sake of criticism, if someone is just telling you this is all rubbish and you should just go and die, that ignore that criticism because that is just
I
irrelevant
don't
because
think
it does
people
not
will
help
say
you as
that
a
so
writer.
openly. So
People do. So it doesn't help you as a writer, and it doesn't help your career, it doesn't help anyone in the world. So that is the criticism you should ignore. But if it's constructive criticism, like a review that highlights the good parts of your book, but it also highlights the bad parts and then says this is where you can get better, that is what you should focus on. So yeah, this is what my take on criticism.
So I
yeah.
haven't received any criticism yet because the story has just come out, and generally, I have a very, very thin skin. I don't do well with criticism, and it's just, I think probably it stems from one's own insecurities, that what you take it to mean about yourself. So generally, if somebody's giving me criticism, I mean, I don't know in what situation, but I'm generally really hard on myself. So if someone is critiquing piece of work, for instance, or at work, I feel like things haven't gone as well as I would have hoped they would, I'm actually my harshest critic. So
Mhm.
this is something I'm really working on, like, you know, learning to be more empathetic towards myself. As far as like literary critique is concerned, when like I'm critiquing books, I'm actually the only time I'll come out and really like not trash a book, but be very, very critical is when it's a huge author where I feel like they're never going to read my review, so I can be very, very blunt. You know, like when I read Anne
You have the
Burns'
benefit of anonymity. Yeah.
Milkman, I came out and I said, I just really, I wanted to love this book, but I really didn't like it. I mean, parts of it. Even then, I said what I liked about it. But when I'm actually critiquing new authors or people who I know can actually read my reviews, then I'm very, very I don't know, gentle with the critique because I just don't like being the kind of person that hurts someone's feelings, but at the same time you have the responsibility to be honest in your review as well.
Obviously.
So I'm always very, very cautious of that. And there are times when I won't review a book just because I don't want to come out with a negative one, so I'd rather just not review it.
Mm. I totally agree with you.
That's great. So I was wondering if you'd like to read a little bit from your stories.
Oh. Um,
Let me just grab the book. I wasn't ready
Yeah,
to
yeah.
read.
Take your
I
time.
I don't I wasn't
Take
either.
your,
I'm gonna have to grab the book as well. Where exactly have I put it?
take your time. Don't worry. Just
One second, I'll be back.
Taha, I haven't like practiced reading the
it's
story.
okay. We're just enjoy.
Did I just read the
No, no.
start?
Yeah, yeah. Read a paragraph or whatever you think works.
Okay.
Something that gives people a flavor of your writing, and I think it's a good way to get
Sure.
people interested.
Okay, so I'll just start from the second paragraph, maybe.
Yeah.
I push open the glass door to Studio 6 and scurry to the desk where I put my bag down and switch on the computer. The windowless room is stuffy as always. I turn on the AC, take off my mask, and sanitize my hands. Before settling down, I put on the sunglasses I've brought with me and snap a quick selfie. The network insists on engagement, and with the most number of social media followers of any RJ in Pakistan, I deliver. Under an image of me looking up sideways at the camera, I post the caption: if you're not going out, wear sunglasses indoors. On today's show, we're discussing what you're missing the most during quarantine. Tune in to FM 77.7. Hashtag when life gives you lemons. I think I'll just stop there.
It's lovely. Yeah. Yeah.
Very well done. So it's my
Indeed.
turn now.
Yeah, it's your turn.
Okay, so I'm gonna read from the part that everyone sort of liked, the conversation between the mother and the son. So he pulls out his mobile phone and calls the one person who he knows will shower him with boundless affection during this psychological ordeal. Hello, beta. How are you on this fine morning? His mother's breezy voice soothes his restless heart as he does his best to appear in control of his emotions. His mother has little patience for his outbursts. Mama, he says calmly, I want to come home. What do you mean? There's a sharpness to her tone that instills fear in his heart. Honestly, Asif, haven't you been watching the news? This bloody corona is everywhere. Do you want to come over and pass it on to your 80-year-old father? He's barely coping with it as it is. No visits, please. Asif takes a deep breath before pleading his case. Mama, you don't understand. I have to leave this place. I cannot stay here anymore. I promise I'll stay in the guest room upstairs far from both of you. Just let me come over, please. I'm going mad cooped up in the apartment all day. And you won't be cooped up in this house? You will have to stay in the guest room for 2 whole weeks before we can let you see us. Are you prepared to do that for our sake? What about Saima and the kids? Why was his mother being so dismissive? He does his best to respond calmly and address his mother's concern. I'll be I'll be the only one coming, Mama. I can't stay in the guest room for 2 weeks. I need to be able to access the garden and the lounge at least. I'm losing my mind here. So basically, you don't care whether we live or die. I'm losing my mind here, Mama, he shouts on the phone. I've been fired and I just cannot cope with Simon and the kids around me all day. His mother falls silent for a moment. When she finally speaks, her voice is soaked in venom. I begged you to stay with us after your marriage, but you had lofty dreams of setting up a life with dear, independent Saima. Do you mean to tell me that there is trouble in paradise now? Mama, please, Asif pleads. You're going to be 50 years old in a few years, Asif. Grow the F up and know your place. She disconnects the phone.
I love how you just had a little sense of your own. So you have a lot of. Someone has mentioned Bravo Avais Khan. So
I think
well
that's one of
done.
my students, Regina. Thank you so much.
Lovely. So this has been a lot of fun, and I just wanted to know before we end, what are you guys doing next? What are you writing next?
Oh, well, as I told you, my next book comes out in summer 2021. It's published by Orenda Books. And In the Company of Strangers, audio version is also coming out next year. Sorry, actually this
Excellent.
year. Yeah. So very excited about that as
Brilliant.
well. And over to Tamreez then.
Um, I've been working on a novel, and I had
Excellent.
put it away for a while. So my ambition is to get back to it and finish it at some point, but I have no idea when that would be. So it's a work in progress.
We wish you all the best for that, and thank you so
Thank
much for the
Thank you so much for having
insightful
us.
conversation. And we have a lot of comments pouring in even now.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so you have a lot of love coming in. Looking forward to for all the brilliant works. Excellent.
Thank you, Regina. Thank
Okay,
you.
then this has been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing a book from Tamriz and a second book from Aves very soon.
Thank you.
And
Thank
all
you.
right then, thank you so much. Goodbye.
you. Thank you so much, Taha. This was
Bye.
a lot of fun. Thank you.
I'm
Really a
glad.
lot
I'm
of fun.
glad you
Thank
had
you.
fun.
Bye.
Bye bye.